They are targeting rural areas, specifically areas in which there is a high concentration of people of color. What do you make of this strategy?
You know, there is really a lot of interest right now in ensuring that folks who are not typically tapped into the mainstream of electoral politics, that they are getting excited about this election. The focus from Walz has clearly, from the DNC, as you can see from last week, in the last couple of weeks since Walz was announced, that there's an interest in really bringing folks into the fold who may have been a little bit dismayed with how the Biden administration had been handling the campaign, with his performance at the debate, and with the fact that he was still going to be the nominee. So now there's this kind of excitement about this current ticket, and they're reaching out to folks who I believe that they think may come back into the fold with them.
Well, it is worth noting, as well as they try to bring people back into the fold, black voters included, that Kamala Harris is making history here. She is a woman of color leading a major party's presidential ticket, and yet she doesn't necessarily really seem to be leaning into the historic nature of her candidacy. Jen, is that wise? Do you think that's a political decision or a personal one?
You know, I love that you asked if it's political or personal. I believe the personal is political. And I think that when we saw President Barack Obama say, "I am not the president of Black America, I am the president of all of America," he was helping us understand why this is so important for those folks who are running for office who are in this unprecedented position, because there will be people who are concerned that they are just running on a specific set of limited issues, that if you are a woman running for the highest position in the United States, that you are just there to focus on women's rights to the detriment of other folks' rights, that if you are a Black American, that you will just focus on the issues affecting Black America. And so a lot of this messaging is to signal to folks who have those concerns that maybe this is not going to be just for one subset of the electorate, right? Maybe this is a campaign for everyone. Maybe this is an administration for everyone. And that is a political choice. But I also think that when we think about Kamala Harris's record, who she was in California and who she's been since she was in the Senate and the White House, it's actually very much on brand.
Well, as we consider her trajectory here in the policies that she has adopted, we have seen her do some flip-flopping, Jen, like, for example, the issue of fracking. In 2019, when she was running in the Democratic primary, she was all for a fracking ban. She has since changed her mind on that and didn't address climate really at all in Chicago at the DNC last week. And especially for younger voters that you spend a lot of time interacting with and talking to about the issues. Is that a problem for her?
You know, the young people I'm speaking with, the folks who are millennials and Gen Zers, are concerned about the kind of lackluster policy platform that we have so far, which is not much, right? There have been concerns that not much is being said. But when I ask young people what they think about that, they say, oh, well, that's exactly what Donald Trump has been doing this entire time. So they see it more as a political choice to not reveal a lot about the Harris-Walz kind of policy initiatives that will happen in the first 100 days. But it actually does also kind of instigate a lot of anxiety among young people who are wondering what this means for them, right? The flip-flopping is scary. The uncertainty is scary. So while it is I think a smart political decision right now, it's not smart in the long term.
Well, certainly Donald Trump has called attention to the flip-flops of Kamala Harris, but he also has lobbied any number of personal attacks against her. He's openly talked on the campaign trail in recent weeks about how his advisors keep telling him not to do that, and how he, when polling his audience, who then cheers, wants to keep going with the personal attacks. I asked the RNC co-chair and his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, about that earlier today, whether or not he needed to be focusing more on policy. This is what she told me.
Donald Trump was such a great brander of people that it really gave him an edge during the primary with 16 other candidates, all of whom could have been great presidents or great presidential nominees for the Republican ticket. And you look at the way that he branded Hillary Clinton. You look at the way that even in the early primaries in 2024, you saw him do the same thing with people like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. It's Donald Trump who was left standing at the end.
So whether you want to call it branding or just personally attacking, Jen, is that something that works with anything other than Trump's base?
I think that's really a great framing. And I think us political scientists who study this work find that so intriguing, right? The idea that Donald Trump is branding these other candidates is actually hilarious because we know that from the priming literature that actually it's priming that he's doing. He's tapping into people's existing biases and pulling in those stereotypes, those ideas about racial minorities, gender minorities, about people who are different from him. And he's highlighting them and casting a light on them, a negative light in most instances. And that's sticking. The area where he struggles with that is where you have someone like Kamala Harris, who's been in politics for a very long time. It's going to be really hard for him to change the Harris brand when Harris has already created a brand for herself, right? I think that since so many people already know who a Kamala Harris executive is, they don't actually have to listen to Trump to find out what that might look like.
Well, she may have another chance to help define that for herself tomorrow when she sits down for her first big interview on CNN. Jen, what does she most need to answer for in that conversation?
I think that she really needs to talk about Gaza. Most people were very concerned about the DNC and the fact that there were Palestinian folks who were present, who had speeches prepared, who were actively asking for accountability in that context, in that framework, and who were not allowed to speak. There are a lot of people who are supporters of Harris Walz, who are excited about Harris Walz, but who are still concerned that we're in a place where we're supposed to be getting back to a frame of democracy, but we have groups of people who are not allowed to even be listened to and heard. I think she also has to talk to young people about her stances on policing. She had a lot of police officers, sheriffs, carceral folks, correctional folks involved in the DNC. And while that was absolutely a choice to try again to bring in those people into the fold who maybe have been looking at her as maybe not their candidate, it also is alienating people who have been looking at her as their potential hero. So she's got to speak to those audiences who are now concerned that she might not be in their corner anymore.